The HM prison maze was considered the most secure penitentiary in all of Europe during the early 1980s. Located in County Down, Northern Ireland, this facility was designed to hold the most dangerous paramilitary prisoners during the height of the conflict, known as the Troubles. It was a symbol of British authority and a fortress of concrete and steel that was deemed impossible to escape from by the government officials who built it. However, on a quiet Sunday in September 1983, the illusion of invincibility was shattered in a dramatic fashion. 38 prisoners managed to execute the largest prison break in the history of the United Kingdom, leaving security forces stunned and the reputation of the prison in absolute ruins. To understand the magnitude of this event, one must first understand the volatile atmosphere of Northern Ireland in 1983. The region was gripped by a violent sectarian conflict that had been raging for over a decade, involving Republican paramilitaries, Loyalist paramilitaries, and British state security forces. The Maze prison was the holding ground for the most committed and dangerous members of the Provisional Irish Republican Army. These were not ordinary criminals, but politically motivated individuals who viewed themselves as prisoners of war. Their confinement was a continuation of their struggle, and they organized themselves within the prison walls with the same military hierarchy and discipline that they maintained on the outside. The architecture of the maze was specifically engineered to prevent any unauthorized exit. The prison consisted of 8 distinct H blocks, which were named for their shape when viewed from above. Each block was a self-contained unit, surrounded by its own high concrete wall topped with razor wire. Beyond these individual block walls lay the main perimeter of the prison, which was guarded by watchtowers, dogs, and armed patrols. The entire complex was a labyrinth of fences, gates, and cameras designed to disorient and contain. The authorities believed that no single man could breach these defenses, let alone a large group. They relied heavily on the physical barriers and the strict routines enforced by the prison staff. Inside the H blocks, the prisoners maintained a rigid command structure that baffled the prison guards. They obeyed their own commanding officers rather than the wardens, and they spent their days analyzing every weakness in the prison security system. Among these prisoners was a man named Larry Marley, who was a mastermind of strategy and psychological warfare. Marley was not interested in small-scale escapes or individual glory. He wanted to orchestrate a mass breakout that would serve as a propaganda victory for the Republican cause. He spent years cultivating relationships with the guards and observing their habits to find the one flaw in the system that could be exploited. Larry Marley noticed that while the physical walls were impenetrable, the human element of the security system had become complacent. The guards had settled into predictable routines and often cut corners to save time or effort. Marley realized that the greatest weakness of the maze was not a hole in the fence, but the regular delivery of food and supplies. A massive food lorry entered the prison complex every day to deliver meals to the various H blocks. This vehicle was the only object large enough to transport a significant number of men through the series of locked gates and checkpoints that separated the prisoners from freedom. The plan that began to form in the minds of the prisoners was audacious and fraught with extreme danger. They intended to seize control of an entire H block, specifically H Block 7, and hold the guards hostage to prevent them from raising the alarm. Once the block was secured, they would hijack the food lorry when it arrived for its delivery. The prisoners would then load themselves into the back of the truck and force the driver to take them out through the main gate. It required precise timing and absolute secrecy, as a single slip-up would alert the watchtowers and result in a massacre. Preparation for the escape involved smuggling weapons into the most guarded prison in the United Kingdom. Over a period of several months, the prisoners managed to bring in 6 handguns and a small number of knives. These items were smuggled in piece by piece, often hidden inside the bodies of visitors or prisoners returning from court appearances. The weapons were carefully reassembled and hidden within the hollowed-out spaces of the H Block 7 walls and furniture. The prisoners also began to hoard uniforms taken from officers, or fashioned their own approximations to confuse the guards during the initial takeover. The date chosen for the operation was Sunday, September 25, 1983. Sundays were selected because the prison staffing levels were lower, and the routine was generally more relaxed than during the week. The prisoners knew that the element of surprise was their only advantage against the overwhelming firepower of the British Army stationed just outside the perimeter. The leaders of the escape included Bobby Story and Jerry Kelly, who were hardened operatives willing to risk death to regain their liberty. They briefed a select group of 38 men who would participate in the breakout, while keeping the rest of the block in the dark. On the morning of the escape, the atmosphere in H Block 7 was tense, but the prisoners maintained a facade of normalcy. They went about their cleaning duties and recreation time, while secretly distributing the hidden weapons and preparing for the signal. At approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, the order was given to move. Simultaneously across the block, prisoners overpowered the officers in the central administration circle and the various wings. They used the element of surprise to disarm the guards and bind them with flex ties and tape before dragging them into empty cells. The takeover of H Block 7 was swift and brutal. The prisoners knew they had a limited window of time before the central control room would notice a lack of communication from the block. They forced the officers to surrender their uniforms and car keys. The escapees donned the stolen uniform to disguise themselves as guards, hoping to fool the patrols and the gatehouse staff. Some officers who resisted were struck with the butts of the handguns or threatened with knives. The priority was silence and total control of the environment before the food lorry arrived. To ensure no alarm was raised, the prisoners manned the control desk of the block, answering phone calls from the main administration. They mimicked the voices and protocols of the officers, assuring the central command that everything was normal in H Block 7. This deception bought them crucial minutes as they waited for the transport that would carry them to freedom. The tension in the block was palpable as 38 men gathered in the central circle, clutching their weapons and waiting for the sound of the diesel engine that signaled the arrival of the food lorry. When the food lorry finally pulled into the loading bay of H Block 7, the driver was immediately ambushed. He was pulled from the cab, and a gun was pressed to his head. The prisoners explained the situation to him in no uncertain terms. He was to drive the truck exactly as instructed, or he would be killed instantly. The driver, terrified and overwhelmed, agreed to cooperate. The prisoners then loaded 38 men into the back of the lorry, concealing themselves under blankets and empty food containers, leaving only a few men in stolen uniforms to sit in the cab. The prisoner Jerry Kelly took the passenger seat in the cab, dressed in a stolen officer uniform. He kept his handgun trained on the driver, ready to fire if there was any sign of betrayal. The lorry began its slow journey from H Block 7 toward the series of gates that led to the outside world. Inside the back of the truck, the men lay in total darkness, holding their breath and praying that the suspension of the vehicle did not give away the immense weight of the human cargo. Every bump in the road felt like a potential disaster. The lorry approached the first internal checkpoint, where a guard waved them down. This was the first major test of their disguise and the nerves of the driver. The guard glanced at the driver and the figure in the uniform next to him, but saw nothing amiss. He opened the gate and waved the truck through. A collective sigh of relief passed through the hidden men, but they knew the hardest part was yet to come. The main gatehouse was the final and most secure barrier monitored by armed soldiers and senior prison staff. As the lorry rumbled toward the main gatehouse, the plan required a shift in tactics. The prisoners knew they could not simply drive through the final gate without being inspected. They needed to take control of the gatehouse itself. The truck stopped at the administrative building near the exit, and a group of prisoners dressed as guards jumped out. They walked confidently toward the gatehouse, pretending to be officers ending their shift. Their goal was to get inside the secure area and overpower the staff before opening the final automatic gates. The group entered the gatehouse and immediately drew their weapons. They ordered the staff to freeze and get on the floor. However, the situation at the gatehouse was far more chaotic than the takeover of the H block. There were more officers present than expected, and some of them fought back. A struggle ensued in the confined space of the guardroom. Panic began to set in as the prisoners realized that they were losing control of the situation. The alarm had not yet sounded, but the noise of the scuffle was growing louder. During the melee in the gatehouse, an officer named James Ferris attempted to raise the alarm. He was pursued by the prisoners and collapsed during the confrontation. Ferris suffered a heart attack and died at the scene, adding a grim fatality to the escape attempt. Other officers were stabbed or beaten as the desperate prisoners tried to silence them. The carefully choreographed plan was disintegrating into a violent brawl. The prisoners managed to open the main gate mechanism, but a staff member had already triggered the emergency alarm. The sound of the siren pierced the air, signaling that the prison was in lockdown. The prisoners in the lorry and those in the gatehouse knew their cover was blown. To make matters worse, a staff car had pulled across the exit, blocking the path of the lorry. The vehicle could go no further. The escapees were now trapped in the kill zone between the inner and outer perimeter fences, with the British Army barracks just hundreds of yards away. The order was given to abandon the truck and run for it. 38 men poured out of the back of the lorry, and the gatehouse scrambling toward the outer fences. It was a scene of absolute chaos. Some prisoners hijacked cars from the staff parking lot and tried to ram through the outer fence, while others sprinted on foot. Guards who had regained their composure began to fire at the fleeing men. The prisoners returned fire with their smuggled handguns, creating a gun battle at the entrance of the United Kingdom maximum security prison. The outer perimeter was a tall wire fence that was difficult to climb, but adrenaline fueled the escapees. They threw themselves over the barrier, disregarding the razor wire that tore at their clothes and skin. Once over the fence, they scattered into the surrounding countryside of County Down. They ran through fields and waded through streams, trying to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the prison before the inevitable cordon was established. The biggest prison escape in British history had just occurred. Within minutes, the area was swarming with police and military personnel. Helicopters took to the sky, and roadblocks were set up on every major road within a 20-mile radius. The authorities were humiliated and furious. The hunt for the 38 escapees became the top priority for the British government. In the immediate aftermath, 19 of the prisoners were recaptured in the vicinity of the prison. Some were found hiding in ditches or streams, while others were caught trying to hijack civilian vehicles. However, 19 prisoners managed to slip through the initial dragnet. These men became the most wanted fugitives in the country. They hid in barns and haystacks during the day and moved only at night. They relied on a network of sympathizers to provide them with food, clothing, and safe houses. The escape humiliated the security forces, who had claimed the maze was escape-proof. The image of the open gate and the abandoned food lorry was broadcast on news stations around the world. The escape had immediate political repercussions. The governor of the prison resigned, and an official inquiry was launched to determine how such a massive breach of security could have happened. The inquiry revealed a catalog of errors and complacency, including the failure to search the food lorry and the lax supervision of the H blocks. The government was forced to spend millions upgrading the security of the prison to ensure that such an event could never happen again. For the 19 men who remained at large, the journey was far from over. Some made their way across the border into the Republic of Ireland, where they could blend in more easily. Others traveled further, afield to the United States or Europe. The group included high-profile figures like Bick McFarlane and Jerry Kelly, who would continue to evade capture for some time. The escape became a legendary tale within Republican circles, inspiring songs and murals across Northern Ireland. Over the following years, the fugitives were gradually tracked down. Some were arrested in the Republic of Ireland and faced lengthy extradition battles. Others were caught in shootouts with special forces. Kieran Fleming, one of the escapees, drowned in the Bannog River while trying to escape an ambush by the Special Air Service the following year. The pursuit of the maze escapees continued for decades, with some not being apprehended until many years later. One of the most notable recaptures was that of the mastermind Larry Marley. Although he had orchestrated the entire plan, he did not actually escape on the truck. He had been moved to a different block shortly before the breakout date, but his plan worked perfectly for his comrades. Marley was later assassinated by a loyalist paramilitary unit at his home in 1987. His funeral was a massive event, attended by thousands of Republicans, cementing his status as a key figure in the conflict. Bick McFarlane and Jerry Kelly were eventually arrested in Amsterdam in 1986. They were extradited back to Northern Ireland to serve out the remainder of their sentences. However, the political landscape was beginning to shift. By the 1990s, the peace process was underway, and the status of paramilitary prisoners became a central bargaining chip in the negotiations for the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement, signed in 1998, provided for the early release of paramilitary prisoners from both sides of the conflict. This meant that many of the maze escapees who had been recaptured and returned to prison were eventually released under the terms of the peace deal. The prison that was once the symbol of the conflict was eventually closed in the year 2000. The H blocks where the escape took place were largely demolished, leaving only a few sections as a historical reminder. The maze prison escape remains a subject of intense study and debate. For the British authorities, it was a catastrophic failure of intelligence and security procedure. For the Republican movement, it was a triumph of ingenuity and determination against overwhelming odds. The event demonstrated that even the most secure systems are vulnerable to human error and the sheer will of those who wish to be free. It stands as a pivotal moment in the history of the Troubles. Today, the site of the Maze prison is a desolate place. The vast concrete walls and watchtowers are gone or decaying. But the story of the 1983 escape continues to be told. It is a story of planning, deception, violence, and the complex history of Northern Ireland. Whether viewed as a crime or a military operation, the escape of the 38 prisoners from H Block 7 is undeniably the most significant prison break in the history of the United Kingdom.